Welcome to Compassionate Cultures, the podcast. You're about to go on a journey of empathy, understanding, and transformation. Get ready to dive into the heart of humanity's most pressing questions with me, Rebecca Hemmings, the CEO of Strawberry Words Training Consultancy, and guests. It's time to turn up the volume on kindness and to amplify the voices of minorities that often go unheard. This podcast asks questions like, how can we create workplaces where ethnic minorities thrive without the chains of career stagnation? What if universities were safe havens for all, free from the storm of microaggressions? And how can we bridge the gaps between cultures that have been divided by the walls of bias and ignorance? This is not just a podcast. This is a revolution of empathy. Welcome to Compassionate Cultures, the podcast. Get ready to explore, learn, and change the world one compassionate conversation at a time. Welcome back. So, today I want to talk about unconscious bias and just one particular method you can use to undo your unconscious bias. But before I go on, I think it's really important just to go over again or just to remind people that we all have unconscious biases, okay? Because one of the biggest barriers that we have to overcome when talking about this is getting over people's blind spots of their biases, okay? And I know why this is, my theory as to why this is this. I truly believe that obviously talking about racism and discrimination, that can be difficult. Nobody wants to be seen as being that bad person who does all that stuff that those, racist or discriminatory people do, right? So I think people associate the label of unconscious bias with being a bad person. And that's completely just not true, okay? So the first thing to do is to dismiss that idea, okay? That's not what's being said. That's not what unconscious bias means. It just means that, when we think about the word bias, let's go with that bit first. It means a judgment. You make judgments. We all make judgments, right? We're just saying that often we do that unconsciously, and it makes sense, right? Because 95% of our thinking is not conscious. So a lot of stuff's going on in our brains. Our brains are very busy, but we're not aware of 95% of that. This is why sometimes when we do something, we surprise ourselves like, oh, I didn't know I could do that, or I didn't know I was thinking like that, or I don't know why that upset me, or oh, that's made me feel really good, or and it's often because our brain is doing something else and we're just not aware of what our brain is doing. So does it not make sense that when it comes to our biases, we would also have some biases that are unconscious? We do, right? And so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I just think it's really important that if you're still at the stage where you're like, no, I treat everybody the same, I do not have unconscious biases, and I know many people genuinely do, so I'm not mocking you, but I think it's really important that you get to the point where you acknowledge the fact that you do have unconscious biases. I have them, everybody has them. And I think that's the thing as well. I think people often think that someone like me who talks about discrimination on a regular basis, or because I come from a marginalized or minoritized background, people think I must think that I don't also have unconscious bias. No, I know that I do. Is it comfortable? No. Do I love the fact, especially when I know that some of my unconscious biases are negative? No, I don't like that. But I accept that I'm human, and this is part of being human. And I also know that by becoming aware of my unconscious biases, because there are ways you can become aware of your unconscious biases, that I can then begin to do the work to undo those. Okay, and that's also important to say that you're in a much better position when you can acknowledge that you have unconscious biases, because then you can do something about them. But if you're in the denial stage where you're just fervently believing that you do not have unconscious biases and how dare you suggest that I do type thing, plenty of people do think like that, then you are far more likely to cause harm to people unwittingly, because you're not willing to look at those unconscious biases. So I'm going to talk to you about just one way of undoing your unconscious bias today, and that's through this idea of contact theory. And I'm just leaning over to remind myself of the name of the theorist Gordon Allport, who came up with this idea of contact theory. And what that is, it's basically stating that when you have cross-cultural interactions, you then naturally begin to see people as individuals and not necessarily as representatives of groups of their particular identity, right? So, rather than, all Indian people are like this or all Jamaican people are like this, once you get to know X person from the Indian community or X person from the Jamaican community, and you really like them, they're really nice, and oh my gosh, you're really funny and all of that. If you previously had views about the entire Indian population or Jamaican population, for example, the idea is that those will begin to dissipate as you realize, oh, okay, I guess not everybody's the same. And I'm giving you the simple version of this, just for brevity, really, because I'm really not planning to make this episode very long. But there are conditions, some of those conditions are everybody must be of an equal status. If you can imagine, if there's a hierarchy to that, then you can still begin, if you're the person at the top of that hierarchy, you can still see yourself as being superior to that person, and therefore you're more likely to pass judgment, for instance, or even the opposite way around. You might see yourself as inferior to that person and still pass judgments on that person and their communities. Also, there must be meaningful interaction, so that you can't just be in an environment, just sit there and hope that, okay, all my unconscious biases are going to be undone now because I'm sitting in a group of diverse people in the middle of the city centre. That's not going to work, all right?
Hey, I know you're enjoying the podcast episode, but I just want to quickly come in and say, look, if you're an organisation that needs anti-racism training for your organisation because your staff are lacking in a racial literacy, they don't have the words, they get stuck when talking about racism, they want to be able to deal with incidents, but they're not sure how to, then check out our Time to Talk About Race online CPD accredited course at strawberrywords.co.uk. Okay, we can train from 10 to 10,000, but get in touch today at admin@strawberrywords.co.uk. Now back to the episode.
So there has to be meaningful interactions, conversations, opportunities to get to know people. So as you're listening to this, I want you to think about how you could do this within your workplace setting. How might that be set up? Schools do it all the time. They do cross-cultural exchanges. I remember going on trips, and I mean, this was really a really simple way of doing it. But I remember I went to a school in the inner city of Birmingham, and we did a cross-cultural exchange. They probably wouldn't have called it that, but now I think about it, it was that, because then we met up with children who were from the suburbs, if you like, of the outskirts of Birmingham, who, they were quite affluent and they spoke very differently to us, and they just had a different lifestyle. And whereas I may have come, and I don't remember, but I may have gone into the situation thinking, oh, they're going to be very posh and stuck up and all of that. Those would have been, I guess they were conscious biases, but I would have had unconscious biases as well. By the time, we'd finished, we were on an outward bounds type trip. We were great friends with those other children. All those barriers had gone, and we just saw them for the human beings that they were. So, undoing unconscious biases does not have to be complicated. You just have to do the work, and the work has to be consistent. So, there are ways that you can do that with the workplace, but also there are ways that you can do this on a personal level. What community initiatives can you get involved in? What sports could you play where there are lots of different people? What volunteering could you do, for example, okay? Again, going back to the workplace, there are trips that could be taken, visits to various organizations, exchanges, and so on. Opportunities to meet with different people within the organization, because many organizations are diverse, but often people are mixing, for instance. But again, you've got to just make sure that you're all on an equal footing. If there is a power imbalance, it doesn't tend to work as well. Okay, so that's just an overview of contact theory, just one way in which you can begin to undo your unconscious biases. Okay, so that's it. I will see you on the next episode. If you like this episode, like it, subscribe, share, and all those wonderful things. Okay, bye.